Hello, welcome and welcome back to the Marni On The Move podcast. I'm your host, Marni Salop. Today on the podcast, I'm introducing an all-new series around running and leading up to the 2024 New York City Marathon called The Road to the Race. Joining me today and on many of the episodes is running and triathlon coach Dave Mendelson. Dave is a 16-time New York City Marathon racer. He also has paced the New York City Marathon several times, and he has completed 100 plus marathons. So he certainly knows a thing or two about New York City and marathons and training and racing. He is also a triathlon coach, a triathlete, and works with Empire Tri Club. During today's conversation, Dave shares why it's so important to get started with your training when you're anywhere between 14 and 16 weeks out from the New York City Marathon. We also talk about weekly mileage and whether or not you need to bulk up on your weekly mileage or if you can get by just doing average weekly mileage. We also talk about setting goals and working with the coach, which is also a big part of how you decide what weekly mileage you're going to be doing and why. And last up, we talk about the importance of the long run and what happens if you miss yours. Dave has lots of great advice. Dave offers a quick, high-level overview of the New York City Marathon race course, taking into account different strategies and general training. Dave and I are planning several episodes focusing on different components of the New York City Marathon, from training to race day and travel and getting to Staten Island, to course specifics and strategy, and I will be talking to a few additional guests around nutrition and injury and healing and recovery. So we've got a really fun series for you all around training for the New York City Marathon 2024. Dave is also my coach for the 2024 New York City Marathon, which I feel so bad for him. But he's also a triathlon coach and a triathlete, and I have a 70.3. And in all the years of working with different coaches and trying to coach myself, I feel like Dave is the perfect coach for me right now because I need someone that understands my goals as someone who wants to do decently in the marathon, but also do great in my 70.3. So I hope you enjoy this conversation. If you have any questions, leave a comment in the comments, DM us on Instagram, send me an email, marnionthemove1@gmail.com. And shout out to our partners at SciFox Health. All right, let's get into this conversation with Dave Mendelson. Shout out to our partners at SciFox Health. They offer the lowest price comprehensive at-home blood test with over 17 key biomarkers, some of my favorites being vitamin D, ApoB, homocysteine, and HbA1c for overall health. As a runner, cyclist, and triathlete, I'm looking to optimize my athletic performance and stay healthy through my training and racing as I gear up for the New York City Marathon and Ironman New York 70.3 this fall. I'll be monitoring my ferritin, iron, HSCRP to make sure I'm not overtraining and staying healthy as I build my endurance. It's great that SciFox Health is affordable because you can test more frequently, which is ideal. P.S. If you use my link, you get an additional 20% off your first test. That's SciFoxHealth.com/MarniOnTheMove. That's SIPHOX.com/MarniOnTheMove. All right, guys, I am here today with Dave Mendelson, my friend and amazing endurance sports marathon and triathlon coach. He works with Empire Tri Club, and he is here today because we are doing a series on the New York City Marathon, which I am running for the second time. And Dave, are you running?
I am. I'm a pacer.
Right. Dave's a pacer.
Yes.
All right, so let's get to know Dave a little bit. Dave, first, how many times have you done the New York City Marathon?
How many times have I done New York or just a marathon in general?
No, New York.
New York, this will be the 17th.
17th time.
Yeah.
Does that include pacing?
Yes, that includes pacing. I've been pacing it each year since 2013 when they invited me to pace, and I have paced consistently since then.
And how many marathons have you done?
I've done 100 and something. I stopped counting after around 100. A lot of marathons.
Oh my God.
I like to run.
You like running?
Yeah.
How many, like, what's your triathlon story? What's the deal there?
Well, with triathlon, I got into triathlon because I was like a lot of people, I was running a lot. And I started to find that the more I wanted to get faster, the more mileage I needed to do. And with that often comes more injury. So I got a bike.
Right.
And I wanted to start to do more cross training, into bike, into swim and stuff. And then it just was sort of like the natural transition, pun intended, to triathlon, because I was already getting all that other fitness. But even still, my main focus is usually on running. That's my strong
Your
point.
main focus is running.
Yeah.
So you're pacing this year the New York City Marathon, and we are 15 weeks out from the marathon. Why is it so important that people start training now? And what would you advise?
Yeah, so 15 weeks, it's a really good time. If you haven't started already, this is great. You're not too late. Usually I try to get people to start their planning program somewhere between 14 and 16 weeks. If you have more time, that's fine as well. But this is like the optimal time. And the reason for that is that, a marathon is a long distance. You're going to be running 26.2 miles. And you need to work your mileage up over the course of several weeks, and you don't want to do it too quickly. So a lot of times people will talk about a 10% rule or some type of rule of thumb in increasing their mileage little by little over a big chunk of time. And the reason that you do that is to avoid getting injury. So 15 weeks that we're at right now gives you ample time.
So if you're a beginner runner, right? I mean, I'm not a beginner endurance athlete, but I've done my fair share of 70.3s, but this is my second marathon.
Sure.
How do you assess like how much mileage someone like me, who's kind of like advanced beginner, let's say, is going to get up to, I can handle the endurance, but running is a different sport.
Right. So you have a strong athletic background already, and you also have a penchant for doing other things, the cycling, the swimming, and all of that, which is really great. So you have the foundation. So, again, even if you didn't have the foundation, this is still enough time.
Yeah.
But for you can kind of roll in, and you might start out your marathon plan with starting out a little bit higher mileage than somebody who is completely new.
Right.
Even still, though, you're not running all the time, but you have that fitness, which will come through from the biking that you do, and the swimming and so forth. Right. So if I was, and I will be when I'm creating a training plan for you, I'll take that into consideration.
Right.
So somebody who's brand new, maybe on a Monday they might be running like 3 or 4 miles or something. By brand new, I mean somebody who's been running a little bit, but they haven't started their training
but this
yet.
is like their first marathon, so not necessarily me, but like
Right.
someone
So
who's
you,
new to marathoning, it's their first marathon.
Yeah,
or
exactly.
Second.
So somebody who's new, maybe they would be starting out with the first week having a couple 4-mile runs, and maybe they'll do some speed work, sort of light, and then on the weekend they'll have a longer run, and maybe that starts out at, maybe it'll be 6 or 8 miles or something to start, and it'll build over time.
Right now.
For you, So for you, you're going to start a little bit higher than that. So you might still have, maybe Monday you might be running 4 or 5 miles, and it won't be hard. It's not all of your runs are going to be hard. That's going to be the main difference with marathon training. A lot more of your runs are going to be an easier pace. And that's because you'll have that volume, and you don't want to damage yourself by everything running to get it done quickly and out of the way.
Right.
You want to go slower. So it doesn't mean you'll never run fast in your training, but most of it doesn't have to be super fast. So, and that's regardless if you're new or not. But for you, you might be doing a Monday that's 5 miles, and a couple weeks 6 or 7 miles, and then you might have something on Tuesday. Maybe it would be cross training. Maybe Wednesday you might be doing some speed work, and maybe that's going to be, usually the speed work I don't measure by the mileage. It's usually around time. So maybe the Wednesday speed work might end up being 45 minutes. Right. But it's not consistent running. It's going to be, maybe you'll run a quarter mile really hard and you'll have 90 seconds recovery and things like that. And then Thursday you might have a tempo run, and maybe you'll build up to 6 miles for that, or 7 miles or something of that sort. Friday could be off potentially.
Right.
And then Saturday or Sunday would be your long run. A lot of people will do it on Saturday because they like to then bike ride or do something on Sunday to sort of actively recover.
Or just like pass out and watch Netflix.
Fine too. Yeah, I do a lot of that myself. So, and the key to all of this is going to be that long run. the weekend long run.
One of the things I've noticed, like as I've been, training, I'm always training. I mean, I do take some time off, but is consistency. Like with running, I don't see it as much in the other sports, but with running, I feel like even if I have a 5 mile run and I run 2 miles, it's better than not running at all, because I've seen myself get faster, like, different periods of the year when I'm training, just by repetitively running.
You will, yeah, absolutely. And this is also something that I think that people that train for a marathon end up almost inadvertently finding that they're very happy with.
Yeah.
And that is that, you're training for a long distance, and whatever your goal is, if it's the first one, I usually tell people not to really focus too much on the time. You want to focus on doing it and in a way that you enjoyed it, so that you might want to do it again. But you will find that throughout the course of these 15 weeks or 14 weeks or 16 or 20, however many weeks that people dedicate to their plan, over time, you will start to get faster and faster and faster. And that's just the repetitiveness of the running, the mileage that you'll be adding on.
Yeah.
You may be doing some speed work. You can train for the marathon without doing any speed work. Oftentimes people want to add it just to break up the monotony, so that all the runs they're doing aren't just slow.
Right.
The long run's always going to be slow, almost always. We sometimes play around with those to try to, again, make it more interesting for people.
Right.
But over time, as the mileage builds up week after week, that's going to translate into speed. So I always tell people there are sort of two ways, in simplified form, two ways to get faster. And one of them is intentionally doing speed work. And if you're doing shorter, if you're not training for the marathon, that could be ideal, like a 5K or 10K. But the other way, aside from doing speed work, is just to run more. So the more mileage you do, you're getting 20 miles this week, 25 the next week, and you're building that up. Some people will be hitting 55 miles in their marathon training.
This week?
Not well.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
they
may come up to
maybe.
They may be peaking during their 16-week plan or 15-week plan. They may peak at 55 miles. It's a lot. But once they get to that point and they're running that much, they will see all the other runs that they're doing should be getting faster. And there are probably a lot of reasons for that. They may be losing weight. They may just be building muscle. All kinds of things, a combination of all these things. But you get faster the more you run.
But consistency is key, for sure.
Consistency, especially for something like the marathon. And consistency will be the main thing.
Yeah, and then if you're in the Northeast, I think a lot of people watching this are in the Northeast, or maybe you live in Florida.
Heat, right?
The heat is like, so here's
real.
The thing. The heat has been a beast this summer, at least for me, but I decided that I'm going to embrace it, because I have no other choice. So mentally, and maybe you can tell me if this was a good approach as a coach, I just said, look, I'm not waking up at 7 a.m. I'm not going to get my long runs in that early, and I'm going to suffer in the heat. So I need to reframe my mindset and just accept that my pace is going to be a minute slower, my heart rate might be higher, I can't look at it. What do you think about that? Yeah.
I think if you can do that, if you can embrace the pain or embrace the suck, that's great. I
have
often,
no choice.
Right, you don't. I tell people a lot of times, get up at 7 o'clock.
Yeah.
It might be cooler. Lately, it's not really. The good thing about the heat is that, you had said you may be running slower in your pace. That could actually be a beneficial thing. It may be forcing you to go slower. It's still going to feel really hard, but the slower pace will probably translate to fewer injuries. I have found in my personal experience, the times that I get injured the most are when I've done way too much mileage without enough recovery.
Right.
And, and that recovery is some days without running, or, also eating right and sleeping, all of that stuff, that aside. The other thing that I find gets me and gets those injuries occurring is too much going fast, right? My approach to running used to be, I'm going to run all the time, and I'd get out there and I want to run, and I like it. I like running fast, but I want to get it done and get back to doing whatever, watching Netflix or working or whatever you do.
Right.
So the point of all of this is to say that when you're running in the really hot heat, the high humidity, and you're forced to run slower, it's probably going to inadvertently keep you from getting injured, because now you're not pounding as hard and as fast as you might have otherwise been.
Yeah.
And then the other benefit to it is, if you have a fall marathon and you're somewhere in the Northeast, or probably many parts of the country, fall is just going to be cooler. So training through all of this right now, acclimating to this heat, getting used to it, like you said, embracing that heat, and training through that, you're going to get stronger because of all the training. But as you go, you're going to get faster from the mileage, and all the plan and the consistency, and you're going to start to get faster because the temperature will come down.
Yeah.
So what you're doing now that seems so hard in September and October and November is going to feel a lot easier.
I mean, it's almost like altitude training.
It is
in a way.
Yeah, it really is.
I mean, you're training high, like they always say, train high to race low, but like train hot to race cool.
Right. Yeah.
I just coined that. Train hot to race cool.
It's true. I love it. It's good. I'm going to use that. But yeah, I think, getting through the heat, we're going to have to suffer probably another month, right? Another month or two. Well, then we'll get into August here.
But last year, like the New York City Marathon was like 70 degrees.
It was.
Right?
It was. I think it was unusually warmer last year. I don't recall how bad it was. No,
yeah.
they all
do
blend.
It last year?
I did. Yeah, I paced it. They all blend in at some point. But typically in November, especially in New York, you can expect temperatures around the low 50s or maybe into the low 60s.
Awesome.
Ideally, for the marathon, most people are thinking, I want low 50s. And maybe a little cloud cover, not too sunny.
Yeah, because it's bright.
Yeah, right, exactly. So we don't have that right now, but we're getting used to running in the 80 and 90 degree heat with 80% humidity. You won't have that come November. It will be, even if it's 60 degrees or 65 degrees or something, it's going to be way better than now.
And just to be mindful, I mean, when you're doing a marathon, you get hotter as you run longer. So that's like important to talk about, but that's another episode of our New York City New York City Marathon series with nutrition, because we're not talking about that today.
Okay.
There's all this buzz on Instagram and social media about mileage, right? And you hear, and this is, I mean, it's not new, but you hear about like professional athletes doing 120 miles a week, and then you hear about recreational athletes trying to do 120 miles a week.
Yeah, not a great idea.
No, but it's like, and then, that's kind of like a bragging point, right? Like how many miles a week can you log? And then there's the school of thought that your training shouldn't be about that. So does it depend on the person?
It's going to depend
How does that
on
work?
So it'll depend first on your experience and your age probably too, your athletic background. When I was younger, I found I could do 100-mile weeks. There was a period of time where I thought I was invincible and that I had sort of cracked this code where I must have just run enough that I unlocked the ability to run it all the time. And I ended up getting injured. I had a lot of weeks with 100 miles. It was pretty fast. I was doing a lot of marathons. One year I did 12. And that year I ended up fracturing part of my hip. And the doctors were like, it's the high mileage. It was just too much mileage, and not listening to the advice that I give everybody that I coach and everything that you read, to take the days off, to take that kind of rest. As I've gotten older and hopefully smarter, I've realized I can't do the 100-mile weeks anymore. For me, the sweet spot's usually like around 55 or 60 miles, which is still a lot. When I start to get above that, I don't see incremental gains in the speed or any ability of that sort, but I do feel I'm closer to getting injured. I'm a lot more tired. Yeah. I'm a lot more achy. So
do you look at training peaks like the fitness level and the CTL and all of that?
A lot of people ask me about those things. And your watch, if you have a Garmin or a Suntoe or whatever you have, your Apple Watch, my Apple Watch, it gives you a lot of the software will tell you, what your athletic level is and your performance and stuff. I don't spend so much time thinking about that number. I think those things are better to look at the trend. See what you want to see with those, because I always wonder how accurate they are. They need to take a lot of stuff into consideration. Are you wearing it all day and getting that baseline at night? Some people aren't. But the better thing to do is to look at the trend. If it's going up, you're doing better, whatever the mark is. Over time, it's like I have a digital scale that tells me not just my weight, but my body density, muscle, fatness, all that other stuff. And I had an actual professional body scan done recently. And the numbers were way different. And
interesting.
And I was talking to the person at this place, the performance center, and he said, look at the scale as a baseline. Don't believe what the number says. The weight is right, but the other stuff is going to be inaccurate. But if it's going down, if it's trending down each week, and it's something that you're trying to trend down, I don't want my muscle mass to be trending down. That would be bad. But if the body fat or something is trending down, that's good. So look for the trends. Or if you're trying to build muscle and you see that it's trending upward, look at that. Don't get stuck on the number. And it's the same with the fitness watches. The numbers that they say, how much rest you have, watch for the trend and the change in those. Don't get hung up on the number.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I'm always looking at my fitness score thinking like, if it's not like 80 or 90 on Training Peaks, that I'm not prepared to race, that I'm not fit.
I say to watch the trends.
I'm obsessed with it.
I mean, everybody gets those. If you see the numbers, you're going to probably get obsessed with them.
Yeah.
But don't let it ruin your life. Focus on what the trend is. But getting back to your question about the mileage, I think, it depends again on a number of things and the level. I would never in coaching have you do 100-mile weeks. I probably wouldn't even have you do 55.
Right.
But some of it can also be supplemented by other things like cycling or swimming or doing yoga, all these other things.
Well, we're going to talk about that, about me specifically, because I'm training for 70.3 and then the marathon's like a month later.
Yeah, and so that's great. So that's a good way to build it too.
Yeah.
Yeah, so again, if somebody is following these trends on Instagram, like you had said, or TikTok, and they want to go out and bang out 100 miles and 100 miles, they're probably going to get injured.
Yeah.
If they have years and years of that high mileage, then that might work very well for them.
But you have to start, you have to ease into it.
You need to ease into it.
Yeah.
Right. Also, realistically, most of us, and people who are listening to Marni On The Move, or even these other things that other spots on Instagram that we don't talk about.
Yeah.
We're usually like a weekend warrior type of person or an age group athlete, but we're not professionals, typically speaking, right? So we have jobs, and sometimes we have families, or we have responsibilities. Getting 100 miles in and having kids or a desk job or all those things, it's extra hard. The pros that are running 120 miles, like you said, many of them are not working,
that's
a
their
desk
job.
That's their job, right. Years ago, there was one of the big American runners, I forget his name, he was sort of focused on, because he was really excellent, he worked at Home Depot in like loading things, and he always talked about how he was running 100-mile weeks, and a lot of the stuff a lot of other sort of cross-training inadvertently was from lifting boxes and doing all these other things. That was unusual.
Yeah.
But for most people, you got to work your life balance.
But for most people, right? So if we're talking to beginners, if we're talking to advanced beginners who are like doing a maybe sub 3-hour marathon,
they'll need more mileage.
They need more mileage, and they probably also need extra speed work and a different plan.
Again, right. So
and that's you kind of like that would be.
That's probably where I would fall in.
Yeah, personally, your training.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's true. So you need to back up and see like, what are my goals? What are my finish time goals? Do I want to run something crazy fast, like under 3 hours, 2:45, something like that? You're going to need a lot more mileage. It still doesn't need to be 100 miles. Some people might feel it does for them, and everyone's going to be different. If for me to run around 3 hours, I probably only need around 50 or 55 miles.
Really?
Yeah.
For your peak week?
Yeah. So and there'll be a lot of weeks that are around that. But I'm not going to have weeks that are 15 or 20 miles. It's going to be a lot closer to 45, 50, 55, but I'm not going to need to go to 60 or 70 personally.
Right. Now, do you drop your bike? Do you stop cycling, or are you still doing it?
I do all of it. I find that the cross training is great. I like to do my long runs on Saturday and then a long ride on Sunday. You're getting the benefit of the endurance from that long ride, but it's also active recovery.
Right.
It's going to flush the lactic acid out of the legs.
So it's better to do your long ride the day after a long run, so your legs are fresh? I
like that. Well, and if you're I think it is because of the freshness of the legs.
Yeah, because that's the focus of the sport.
Right. But even when I train a lot of people that are training for Ironman or half Ironman or other triathlons, and I'll still have them follow the same pattern. Well, Saturday is going to be the long run, and Sunday will be the long ride.
I do that. That's kind of
I think it's easier on the body, though.
Yeah.
Again, everybody varies. I have some people that are like, I want to do my long run on a Tuesday because my work allows for that, and I can get out and do that. And then I'll do a long ride like on a Friday or something. It just that's when it fits in. And at the end of the day, the way I approach coaching and the way I build plans out for people is to talk to them to see what days work for you. What days could you go to the gym if you want to go to a gym? Is it like, if you're swimming, what days? Some people that I coach, like, I can get in a swim on Thursdays and Fridays because it's not crowded, and so that's when I want to swim. So packages, training plans, and so forth can be built all around all of these things.
Right. And I think it's really important, like, if you can, and you're a new athlete, to work with a coach, because it's like there's so many things that come up that you are not dialed into, right? Like even for me, as someone who's been racing for 15 years, it's like I still question certain things, certain paces, certain times, and it's really great to have someone coaching me and saying like, hey, maybe there's too much mileage, or maybe you need to, do more cycling or swim less or something, I don't know. But I mean, the New York City Marathon is an amazing incredible event.
It's an amazing, incredible event. I agree with that. It's my favorite.
So what, like 16 times, like what do you, 17 times.
Yeah.
Why do you keep coming back?
It's my hometown race. I love it. They keep inviting me back every year. I will keep coming back as long as I can run it.
And what do you pace? What time do
I
you
usually pace somewhere between 3:30 and 3:45. I paced London in April at 3:45, so I assume I'll pace, 3:45. I assume I'll pace New York probably around 3:40, 3:45, maybe 3:30 if they need it.
Nice. And so as a pacer, you know, also something to think about when you get into your training is pacing. I mean, the New York City Marathon is not flat. So how do you work with people to understand their pacing throughout the race based on the course? Well, speaking about New York City now.
Yeah, so with New York City or anything that does have hills, New York is not a really hilly city, but we have those big bridges. They're huge.
Right.
It starts out uphill for a mile and a half or so on the Verrazano Bridge, and then it's downhill. So in your training, you probably want to find places that you can do some hills. It's really great in New York to do some of your shorter runs or your long runs incorporating those bridges. So that helps to mimic what the hills are. You don't have to go run up a mountain. It's not going to be that hilly. But I think, and you could train without ever running hills. Yeah. If you get enough of the mileage, you'll be strong. Where it helps, though, I think is psychologically. So, you know, you race day, you'll have these various hills, and you're used to it. And you know, I've done this before. If you can get out and run the various bridges, you'll know specifically. I've run like literally this spot before. But even if not, you could run the Brooklyn Bridge or, you know, the Manhattan Bridge, anything at all.
Because they're hilly. Those are like, there's like the death incline.
It is. Yeah, and so that helps a lot.
Harlem Hill is not. No. It's not big enough.
It's not big enough, but even something like that, running around Central Park or Prospect Park or something, you will get hills. Yeah. And that's going to count.
That counts.
Yeah.
But it's more like practicing 10 on the treadmill, like a 10 incline, you think?
10's pretty steep.
Okay. That might have just been, I might have PTSD from Muscle Man.
Yeah, I think, you know, if you're running on a treadmill, first of all, I always tell people at least do 1%. It seems to mimic a little bit better on what you would actually naturally be running.
Right.
So 1% is like your baseline, and then up from there. But like even 3 or 4 or even 5% on the treadmill, you're really going to feel that. I don't think you need to run beyond that. I will caveat that with that I once upon a time ran almost exclusively on treadmills, but for a decade I think I've run on a treadmill like 3 or 4 times.
Really?
I can't do it anymore.
You can't?
I saw a funny meme today that said something like, it was, you know, that movie Intergalactic or whatever it was that Matthew McConaughey was in it. Anyway, there was a period of that movie where they're on a planet and they say like 1 hour on this planet is the equivalent of time of 7 years back on Earth, and somebody said that they were explaining running on a treadmill
as that way.
Yeah, that's how I feel.
That's so funny. I saw a friend of mine at the gym yesterday, and he was running 13 miles on the treadmill.
Sure, I've done 26.2.
You've done? What's the longest you've gone on?
I've probably a little bit more than 26 miles. But
really?
It's been, I just don't.
What do you do? Like, do you just run the whole time?
I'll watch a movie.
Watch a movie.
Yeah, I'll put on, you know, Netflix or something, find a movie, another one, and
it's like zone 1.
Yeah, it's just you got to zone out and get into it. Or, you know, I listen to music. There have been times that, you know, whatever gets you by.
But you're mostly like, you don't have like, you're always outside now.
Yeah. So when I was leading up to the London Marathon a couple months ago, I got injured maybe a month and a half out. I started to get this awful shin splints, and I was like, then it started to kind of turn into something that I was like, is this a stress fracture? I was really well trained. So instead of doing what I used to do and just kind of run through it and hope for the best, I decided that the last couple of long runs that I had, I would do an elliptical machine, which is even worse than the treadmill. But I didn't want the pounding even on the treadmill on my leg. So I had a couple of days, like I think 3 different weekends, where I was on the elliptical for 3 hours.
And that was a comparable.
I felt that it was pretty comparable. So I was kind of going more by heart rate, the time on it. It's not going to, you know, 3 hours on the elliptical is not going to be the same as 3 hours of running. But I bet it's 2 hours of running, or maybe 2.5. Yeah. And what I needed to do, I think there was like an 18-mile run I needed to do, maybe a 20 or something. I think the longest I was on that elliptical was 3 hours and 45 minutes. And it was like, it felt like
that sounds like painful.
I watched a lot of movies, and even I'd watch something for like a half an hour and get bored and find something else. I took breaks and listened to music. But I got through it.
That's
with
amazing.
a gigantic puddle underneath it. It was very embarrassing.
That's amazing. So back to New York City, right? We're talking about the course, and you're saying we need to train on hills, and if something happens, like, there's always hope. You can always still train, because I feel like that was just really optimistic to hear about your elliptical. I mean, things happen.
Things do, and you need to listen to your body. And if something does start to hurt or to ache, you got to pivot right away. The mistake that almost anybody that really has an injury has is like, something is uncomfortable, I'll run through that. And then it gets to the point where, and you can do that. If it's uncomfortable, run through it. If you are starting to actually feel pain, that's when you need to stop. You obviously see your doctor or any of these things. But a lot of times you can then also pivot. So something is kind of, the sweet spot is where it's like uncomfortable, and it's been uncomfortable for a little longer than you're comfortable with. It hasn't really turned into pain, or maybe it's starting to ache a little more than you want it to. And before it goes beyond that, switch to what you're doing. You could start to bike. You could swim. You're not going to lose your fitness super fast if you pivot. If you stop, if you say that usually something like this usually happens to people as they're really far along in their training, because they've got weeks and weeks and weeks of all the pounding and all the other things their body's not used to. That's when the injuries come up, but that's when you can pivot, and you won't lose your fitness. Going on that stupid elliptical, I still ended up, London was the easiest marathon I have ever done. I was super well prepared for it, even though my last 3 long runs were on that elliptical. And I was really worried too, because I'd never had that experience where that's what I did. And also there's a different level of pressure when you're pacing, because it's not really about you.
You have to pace an entire group of people.
But even still, my fitness never went down. I felt very confident that I had the time, under my feet. And race day came along, and I ran, and I felt good, and I kept thinking about it. How's the shin feeling? Shin never hurt. It was
that's
miraculous.
amazing.
Yeah, it didn't hurt at all.
Did you do any ice baths?
I've tried that. I did a lot of stretching. I did a lot of foam rolling of other parts of the body. Usually if you have something like a knee that's sore or whatever, it's probably not your knee. It's something else. IT band, or your calves are too tight. I think for my case, it probably was something with the calves being too tight. And and that was translating into the shin. So whatever. So I did a lot of foam rolling, massage with the gun and all that stuff. I have a pair of those Normatec sleeves. Spent a lot of time in those. But you don't need any of that. You could just, a simple foam roller will work. You got to just address it.
And where do you stand on strength training, and when should people start doing that if they've never done it before? Like, in terms of training for the New York City Marathon or the marathon, when do you phase it out or bring it in?
Ideally, if people have time, I will build in strength training into their plan. The goal is not to become Arnold Schwarzenegger, like gigantic muscles, but the idea, and again, this comes back to that whole point of optimizing your body and trying to minimize the injury. I want people in the gym. I want them to be doing upper body strength, light arm stuff, high reps, that sort of thing. Core is going to be the main focus. The core in the back. You get a strong core, and everything else will come together better for you. So you could do that with yoga. You could do that with, doing planks. You could do all
single leg deadlifts. There's a million exercises.
And then also the lower body stuff is important too, because when we're running, we're using sort of these running muscles. And if you're also cycling, that's helpful. You're getting a little bit of difference, but we're not moving side to side. It's always a forward and backward thing. So things like even sitting on those machines that they're like the the abductor and adductor machines.
I love those. And or you are closing them and opening them. That's a great machine.
So that's great. So that's going to help with your
I actually need to strengthen my adductors.
So but working on your glutes, your hamstrings, your calves, all of these things, focusing on your shins. The trick again is to just not overdo it and to not go super high heavy weights.
So you want to train and stay healthy.
You should feel when you're at the gym, the workout that you're doing there, you should feel your heart rate is up. It is a challenge, but you're not grunting to push out 8 reps of 500 pounds. You're going through something where you feel like it's a lot less weight, but it's still a challenge. It's not like you're going to go on the 5-pound dumbbells if you could curl 45 or something.
All right. So thanks for sharing all that stuff about strength training. I think that a lot of people think they're training for a marathon, and so they're just going to run, but there's a lot of other things that you need to do to make sure that you're staying healthy and fit and don't get injured. And strength training is one of those things. But let's go back to the New York City Marathon course, because we started this conversation with, the treadmill, this sort of tangent on specific things. And, and basically going out and running on the bridges and trying to kind of train the course. But you can train for New York City anywhere in the world. But talk to me about the course and what people should think about as they're training, even if they don't live here, like how it works.
Well, it's going to be great. If you don't live in New York, it might even be greater because you won't know what you're expecting. You're going to have constant crowd support through the whole way. There's millions of people literally that come out to watch the race. And so it's like, it's like the Super Bowl. It's the time that you're going to be the focus of millions and millions of people. And it's great energy. It'll be that way from once you get over the Verrazano Bridge and a mile or so, maybe around mile 3 or so in Brooklyn, it starts to pick up, and then it never really stops. You lose some of the crowd support on the bridges where it is hard, but for the rest of the time, you've got people screaming. If you put your name on your
That's
bib,
a good tip.
on your shirt, people call out for you, whatever it is. So you'll have that crowd support, which is really helpful. But so as I had said, to just kind of walk people through the course, you're going to start off in Staten Island. For many people, it's the only time that they're ever going to go to Staten Island. For me, I go once a year.
What about the Staten Island half?
I never run that. I haven't done it before. I don't want to go back there.
Okay.
I like the start of the race. So
that's where you're from?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. I mean, I live in Brooklyn. Yeah. So you're going to start out in Staten Island. It's great. You're going to love it. There's all the energy. You'll be standing at the foot of the Verrazano Narrows Bridge, and they usually have like Sinatra playing or something, New York, or something like that. It's like the people that are there all day must get tired of it. But for everybody else, you hear it for a few minutes. The cannon goes off. There's a huge cannon. It's like explosive. Every year it scares me and startles everybody around. We're like, wow, forgot it was a cannon. It's not a gun. And then you're going. So you take off. You're going up the bridge. My advice for people is it's really a lot of high energy. You're going to race up that bridge. Don't race up the bridge. There are a lot of people. And the worst thing you could do is start off too fast. And also to weave through the crowds and crowds of people. So take it easy. You'll go up the bridge. You might not be on the pace that you probably won't be on the pace that you were hoping for, but don't worry about it. As you come down the bridge, you'll start to come back into some of that. You also, again, don't want to pound down the bridge because it's like a mile and a half down.
Yeah.
And
you have to think about the downhills as much as the uphills. Yeah.
Yeah. So you pound down that bridge, you'll suffer later on. So you take it easy down the bridge, but you'll catch up. And then over the next 4 or 5 or 6 miles of the race, you'll ease into your pace. And at that point, you're on a long stretch in Brooklyn that's maybe 8 miles long or so, as you just cruise through further out in Brooklyn. And, I guess it's, what is it? It's not Dyker Heights, but it's out there. I should know.
It's Brooklyn.
It's Brooklyn. It's great.
And then you end up in Park Slope, and you run
through
Williamsburg.
The whole way. You'll run through Park Slope. You'll get there. You'll go through downtown Brooklyn. And at that point, which I think is maybe around mile 8 or 9, that's where the course merges. So you'll start out. One of the other things to note is that there are like 4 different colors. There's orange, blue, green, and something else. They used to be 3. I think it's 4 now.
Yeah, and then they all have slightly different routes. They all have
slightly different routes going over the bridge. There's different ways. They come off the bridge a little bit differently, and they even run on different sides of 4th Avenue for those 8 miles.
For a while, yeah.
Right, until you get to essentially downtown Brooklyn by the Williamsburg Savings Bank, which is not Williamsburg, but it's a big clock tower bank. You can't miss it. And the course merges at that point. So everybody is now on the same spot. And for the rest of the race, every timing mat is the same for everybody.
The other really important part of training for a marathon and the New York City Marathon is the long run. So talk to me about the importance of the long run.
The long run is your key point for the marathon. It's the main. If you do everything else sort of in between, but you nail the long run, you'll still succeed. It's like it's the most important key component. And the long run doesn't have to start off long. It's not at the beginning of your training. Like I think I'd said earlier, it might be 6 miles, 7 miles, 8 miles or something, depending on what your baseline background is. But week after week, you're going to be adding more mileage to that. For a beginner, somebody that hasn't run the marathon before, maybe they've run 1 or 2, I usually like to get people up to 18 or 20 miles.
Okay.
Once or twice. They're not doing like a whole bunch of 20-mile long runs. Okay. Someone who's more advanced, I want them to do more of those 18-mile, get into 20-mile, and then that's where we get into sort of debate with different coaches how much you need to really go beyond 20 miles. Some people never will. I like to have my athletes that are the more advanced ones, and for myself, to get a couple of 22-mile runs. You don't need to run the marathon in the training to run the marathon, but you should get as close as you can. The reason that you don't run 24 or 26 miles, and incidentally, some people do, and a lot of professionals will, but it's pretty hard on the body. And the amount of recovery that it takes to recover from running 25 miles or 24 miles is, it's a lot more recovery needed than the payout of having perhaps run some 20 and 22 mile runs and not being so worn down and being able to do other things.
I also think like it's a mental thing.
It's a humongous mental thing.
Yeah, it's not just about the distance.
Yeah, and also in some people's training, they won't even focus on the miles. They might focus on time. If your goal was to run a 4-hour marathon, maybe some of your runs you might be thinking in the 2.5 or 3 or 3 hours and 15 minutes or something.
Right, for your longest run.
For your longest run. So I for me it's easier to think by mileage. But some people, it's time on the feet. And that also gets back to something that you were saying earlier on when we were talking about the heat.
Right.
I had somebody that I coach who's great. He was supposed to run 15 miles last week. He hit 11. And it was really hot.
Yeah.
And that was the reason. But his 11 miles took 2 hours and some change. And so really, I was talking to him about it, and he grasped this concept because we had gone over it a lot, but embracing that 2+ hours as the time on his feet. He knew it took him longer to run those 11 miles than it ever would take him on a cool day to run 11 miles. But he has 2 hours now in his legs.
Right.
And that's going to be great. So if you're running 2 hours in the heat or the cold or whatever, it's still 2 hours.
Right. I think that's something probably you get from like triathlon coaching, because a lot of the coaching for triathlon is time on your legs.
Does, yeah.
Whereas runners are just so focused on miles and distance. So
I also think that a lot of people like to think in miles or kilometers or whatever. They like to think in a distance. It's something we can digest.
It's a lot easier.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
But it does have to be long. So again, the most important part is really to get that long run. So you'll do those long runs. The other component with the long run that a lot of people know, it has to be slow. It's got to be, your long runs are slow. They should be slower than what you even feel like is slow. So like you should be running this thing.
And slower than what you think you're going to do the marathon in?
Definitely slower. You don't have to train, again, the distance of the marathon to run the marathon or the speed. The speed will come from all the mileage that you're getting.
Got it.
And the consistency. And maybe if you're doing speed work. But the long run is about slow mileage and distance. And that way you can recover, because with the marathon, you've got that day.
Yeah.
You're going to run 26.2 miles, you run it faster. And when you're done, you're done. You don't have to run again 2 days later or 3 days later. Your long run, 20 miles, the next day maybe you'll bike, or maybe you'll just sit on the couch and watch Netflix or whatever. Right. But then another day later, you're running again. So you want to be recovered from that.
Yeah.
Right? So it's got to be slow.
And what if you miss a long run?
If you miss a long run, I mean, don't miss all of them.
Right.
But you can adjust it. So maybe you were supposed to do a 16-miler and you weren't feeling well, or it was really awful rain or something, and you were like, I'll do it the next day, and it was still raining. And so it got pushed off. Whatever, life happens. That next week that you look at that week, and if you had some 6-mile runs, maybe make that an 8-mile and dial back the intensity and have a couple of those. And when you get to that next weekend, you'll hit that. If you missed a 16 and the next weekend was 17, aim for the 16 and see how you feel. And you get to there and you're like, okay, then add that extra mile. And you'll get your 17. No one's gonna take away your birthday. You won't fail because you didn't have 14 different long runs of everything being above 10 miles or something. But don't miss a lot of them. And again, I had spoken earlier about injury.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'll miss the long run because of injury. It doesn't mean you can't do a long endurance type of thing. You could go on a really long bike ride.
Right.
You could do the stupid elliptical machine for 3 hours.
Yeah.
Any of those things, you're still working on your endurance. You're not going to lose it from missing one run.
All right. Well, this is super amazing advice, Dave. Good. And I'm psyched to have you come back on and talk about the course.
Yep.
Specifically, talk about getting to the race and all those things, and we'll do that. That'll be the next episode, guys. So if you like this, stand by. We'll have another episode coming soon.
Now go on a run.
Yeah. Get moving. Awesome.